Newlyweds. David and Judy Davis vanished driving home from their wedding reception in small-town Oregon. 18 years later, their photographer's corrupted memory cards are finally recovered, revealing someone was following them through the lens. The morning light filters through the dusty windows of Rebecca Thompson's photo restoration studio in Salem, Oregon. She adjusts her reading glasses and peers at the computer screen displaying corrupted digital files. It's become routine work, salvaging memories from damaged storage devices. But today's project carries the weight of unfinished sorrow. On her desk sits a manila envelope marked Evidence Davis Case 2006, alongside 3 severely damaged memory cards recovered from a house fire. Inside the envelope, a faded wedding invitation reads, David Michael Davis and Judith Ann Mason request your presence with a date that ended in disappearance rather than happily ever after. Rebecca had been the assistant district attorney handling cold cases when the Davis family first approached her 5 years ago. Now retired and running her restoration business, she'd volunteered to attempt what seemed impossible, recovering images from memory cards that had survived both water damage and extreme heat. The original photographer, Marcus Kellerman, had died in the fire that destroyed his studio, taking with him any answers about that June evening in 2006. The case had haunted Salem's small law enforcement community for nearly 2 decades. David and Judy Davis, both 24, had married in a beautiful outdoor ceremony at the Willamette Mission State Park. The reception lasted until nearly midnight, with over 150 guests celebrating the high school sweethearts who'd finally made it official after 6 years together. Security footage from the hotel parking lot showed them leaving at 12:47 a.m., Judy's white dress visible through the passenger window of David's blue Honda Civic. They were driving to their apartment just 8 miles away, a route David had taken hundreds of times. They never arrived. The initial investigation found their car 3 days later, submerged in the Santiam River 15 miles from the hotel. Both bodies were recovered, showing signs of drowning. The medical examiner ruled it an accident. Possibly David had fallen asleep at the wheel or been blinded by oncoming headlights on the winding river road. But Judy's sister Linda had never accepted that explanation. David was cautious, responsible, completely sober that night. He'd grown up on those roads, knew every curve and blind spot. Something else had happened, something that sent their car off the bridge in the early morning darkness. Rebecca's computer chirps softly as another corrupted file struggles to reconstruct itself. She's been working on these memory cards for 3 months, using specialized software that rebuilds data, fragment by fragment. Of the estimated 800 photos Kellerman had taken that night, she's successfully recovered 247. Most show typical wedding moments: the ceremony, reception, dancing, family portraits. But scattered among the celebration shots are images that don't belong. Photos taken after the reception ended. Dark images of the hotel parking lot. The blue Honda Civic pulling out onto the main road. Headlights following at a distance. Rebecca picks up her phone and dials Linda Mason's number. After 18 years of waiting, David's mother-in-law deserves to know that someone had been watching her daughter's final moments. Linda arrives within an hour, her graying hair pulled back in the same style she'd worn at the wedding. She moves carefully, arthritis limiting her once energetic stride, but her eyes remain sharp with the determination that has driven her relentless pursuit of answers. "You said you found something," Linda says, settling into the chair beside Rebecca's workstation. Rebecca turns the monitor toward her. "These photos were taken after midnight, after the reception ended. Look at the timestamps." The first image shows the hotel's rear parking lot at 12:52 a.m. Through the grainy digital noise, they can make out the Honda Civic's taillights pulling onto Highway 22. The next photo, taken at 12:54 a.m., shows the same road from a moving vehicle, headlights illuminating the Honda ahead, maintaining careful distance. Linda grips the chair arm. Someone was following them. There are 17 more photos taken from inside a vehicle, all showing your daughter's car ahead on the road to the river. Rebecca clicks through the sequence. The images grow darker as they move away from streetlights, but the Honda's distinctive rear lights remain visible. The final recovered photo stops Linda's breath entirely. Taken at 1:23 a.m., it shows the Honda at an odd angle, its headlights cutting across the guardrail of the Mahama Bridge. Through the windshield, barely visible, two figures struggle inside the car. "This wasn't an accident," Linda whispers. Rebecca nods grimly. "I've already contacted Detective Williams. He's reopening the case." Detective Paul Williams had been a patrol officer in 2006, one of the first responders to pull the Honda from the river. Now a veteran investigator, he'd always harbored doubts about the accident ruling. The positioning of the car, the lack of skid marks, the fact that David's seatbelt had been cut rather than torn. Details that had bothered him for 18 years. Within hours of Rebecca's call, Williams is at the restoration studio examining the recovered photos. His trained eye catches what civilian observers might miss: the photographer's position relative to the subjects, the angles that suggest calculated stalking rather than random documentation. "Marcus Kellerman," Williams says, reading from the photographer's business card found in the evidence box. 43 years old when he died in 2019. Ran Kellerman Photography out of his home studio. No criminal record, well regarded in the community. But as Williams begins reviewing Kellerman's client history, a disturbing pattern emerges. Couples who'd hired him reported feeling uncomfortable during their sessions. Complaints about him lingering too long, asking inappropriate questions about their relationships, their families, their personal lives. One bride from 2005 had called the police after finding Kellerman photographing her home 3 weeks after her wedding. He'd claimed to be documenting the neighborhood for a real estate project, but no such project existed. The incident was filed as a suspicious person report and forgotten. Williams drives to the ruins of Kellerman's studio, a blackened foundation on 5 acres outside Salem. The fire had been ruled accidental, faulty electrical wiring in the old farmhouse, but the intensity had been unusual, almost as if accelerated by stored chemicals or film processing solutions. Walking through the debris, Williams notices something the original fire investigators might have missed. The basement foundation shows evidence of recent concrete work, a section that appears newer than the rest of the structure. He makes a note to request ground-penetrating radar. Meanwhile, Rebecca continues working on the damaged memory cards. Late into the night, she manages to recover partial images that reveal Kellerman's true obsession. Hidden among the wedding photos are surveillance shots spanning months, possibly years. Photos of Judy Davis at her job at the local bank, Judy shopping for groceries, Judy and David having dinner at restaurants around town. The timestamps show Kellerman had been documenting her life long before he was hired for the wedding. In one particularly chilling image, taken through what appears to be a bedroom window, Judy is visible brushing her hair before bed. The invasion of privacy is absolute, predatory, suggesting an obsession that went far beyond professional photography. Rebecca calls Williams immediately, despite the late hour. "There's more. I think Kellerman was stalking Judy for months before the wedding." The investigation takes on new urgency. Williams interviews Kellerman's former neighbors, his business associates, anyone who might have insight into his behavior. A pattern of troubling incidents emerges: equipment borrowed and never returned, inappropriate comments about young women, boundary violations that people had dismissed as eccentric artist behavior. Mrs. Eleanor Fisher, who'd lived next door to Kellerman for 15 years, provides the most disturbing testimony. She'd often seen him burning papers and photographs in a barrel behind his studio, sometimes late into the night. The smell had been acrid, chemical, like developing solutions mixed with something else. "He asked me once about adoption records," she tells Williams. "Said he was trying to locate someone from his past. asked if I knew how to search for people who'd been adopted. I thought it was romantic, maybe looking for an old love. Now I wonder. Williams orders a full background check on Kellerman going back to his birth in 1963. What he discovers adds a devastating new dimension to the case. In 1982, when Kellerman was 19, he'd fathered a child with 16-year-old Amanda Mason. The baby had been placed for adoption immediately after birth. The adopted child's name was Judith Ann. Williams sits in his car outside the courthouse, staring at the adoption records. Judy Davis had been Kellerman's biological daughter, a fact she'd likely never known. Her adoptive parents, Robert and Carol Mason, had been loving, devoted, never hiding the fact of adoption, but never discussing the biological father who'd signed away his rights. But Kellerman had known. Somehow, he'd located her. The surveillance photos dating back years suggest he'd been watching his daughter grow up from a distance, documenting her life through his lens, never approaching but never letting go. The wedding photos take on a horrific new meaning. Every image of Judy, the bride getting ready, walking down the aisle, dancing with her new husband, had been taken by the father she'd never known. A father whose obsession had grown into something monstrous. Williams drives to Linda Mason's house, the adoption papers heavy in his briefcase. Linda listens in stunned silence as he explains the connection, her face cycling through disbelief, horror, and finally a terrible understanding. "He was her father," she whispers. "He killed his own daughter." "We think the wedding was his breaking point," Williams explains gently. Watching her marry David, seeing her happiness, knowing he'd never be part of her life. The stalking photos suggest increasing desperation, erratic behavior. The recovered memory cards reveal the likely sequence of events. After following David and Judy from the hotel, Kellerman had apparently forced their car off the road, perhaps by ramming them or by causing David to swerve. The struggle visible in the final photo suggests they'd survived the initial crash, only to be drowned in the rising river water. Whether Kellerman had intended murder or simply confrontation, his actions had destroyed the family he'd spent years watching from afar. The irony is devastating. In trying to possess his daughter, he'd ensured he'd lose her forever. Ground-penetrating radar at the studio ruins reveals additional evidence. Buried beneath the newer concrete in the basement are personal effects that don't belong to Kellerman: jewelry, photographs, items that suggest other victims over the years. Williams realizes the Davis case may be just the beginning of a much larger investigation. Among the buried items is a locket containing a photo of infant Judy, likely taken at the hospital before her adoption. Kellerman had kept it for 24 years, a talisman of the relationship he'd convinced himself he deserved. The case breaks open completely when Rebecca recovers the final, most damaged files from Kellerman's memory cards. These images, taken in his studio, show what appears to be a confession. Photographs of newspaper clippings about the Davis disappearance, surveillance photos arranged like a shrine, and most disturbing of all, images of Kellerman himself holding copies of Judy's adoption papers. One photo shows him standing before a mirror holding a wedding portrait of David and Judy, tears visible on his face. The timestamp reads 3 days after their bodies were recovered from the river. Williams presents the evidence to the district attorney, who agrees to officially reclassify the deaths as homicides. The case that had tormented a family for 18 years finally has answers, though the truth brings more pain than peace. At the press conference announcing the case resolution, Linda Mason reads a prepared statement. Her voice remains steady as she describes the family's gratitude for finally knowing what happened, but her hands tremble as she speaks about the violation of her daughter's memory. Linda says Judy was a kind, trusting person who saw the good in everyone. She would have welcomed her biological father into her life if he'd approached her honestly. Instead, he chose obsession over love, possession over relationship. He stole not just her life, but the chance for healing, for family, for forgiveness. The Kellerman investigation expands as other cold cases are reviewed. 3 other missing persons from the past 15 years show connections to his photography business. All young women, all found in remote locations, all initially ruled as accidents or suicides. Rebecca continues her restoration work, now focused on helping other families find closure. The Davis memory cards represent both triumph and tragedy. Technology finally providing answers that seemed lost forever, but revealing truths almost too terrible to bear. In her quiet studio, surrounded by the tools of digital resurrection, Rebecca reflects on the weight of recovered memories. Some secrets die with their keepers, buried in corrupted files and damaged storage. Others wait patiently in the digital darkness, ready to emerge when the right combination of technology and determination finally sets them free. The Davis family case reminds her that every recovered photo, every salvaged moment, carries the potential to heal old wounds or open new ones. Truth is neither inherently kind nor cruel. It simply is, waiting in the shadows of damaged data for someone willing to piece together the fragments of what really happened. 18 years after David and Judy Davis drove away from their wedding reception into the Oregon darkness, their story finally has an ending. Not the happily ever after anyone had hoped for, but the truth that allows their family to stop wondering, stop hoping, and finally begin the long process of letting go.